is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Sunday in December to break down the Ravens' dominant 35-14 win over the lowly New York Giants. We will discuss Lamar Jackson's impressive 5-touchdown day, why he listened to his mama after the bye week, what we learned about this team. Was there anything really big picture-wise to glean from this dominant performance? And then we'll discuss the penalties. What could have undone the Ravens in this game, but ultimately didn't matter because they're facing a far inferior team. But first, the Banner Ravens podcast is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has been building a legacy of excellence for years, from developing hybrid technology to upping the standards of safety and efficiency. Toyota is always innovating, always making progress. And with the superior lineup of in-stock SUVs, including the adventure-ready RAV4 and capable, affordable Corolla Cross, you can experience the legacy of Toyota for yourself. Visit buyatoyota.com, the official website for deals, to find out more. Toyota, let's go places. Jonas, how much do you think a biplane costs? And how much do you think it costs to run that biplane over a stadium with a banner attached to it mere hours before kickoff?
For a second there, Paul, I thought you were making a joke about the Ravens being a plane coming off the bye. I didn't actually put two and two together that what the single engine plane that flew by MetLife Stadium here just outside the window was a biplane. But it's nice and convenient for what the Ravens are doing schedule wise.
I love how you can get your news any which way this day on X, on the BaltimoreBanner.com, on Blue Sky. Everybody has segmented media these days. I like how we're throwing it back and we're using planes with banners hanging behind them to deliver our messages these days. Last week, a group of fans had a banner fly over the Giants MetLife Stadium, calling out John Mara, the owner. And it happened again this week, and they're calling for everybody's heads, asking that everybody get fired. And after watching this performance against the Ravens today, I kind of understand where fans are coming from, because the Ravens absolutely dominated the Giants today. And that's why my word of the day, Jonas, is laugher. The definition, a person who laughs. But more importantly, informal, it's also a contest or competition in which one person or team easily overwhelms the other, an easy victory. First known usage, late Middle English word dating back to 1375 to 1425. The Ravens took care of business today. They made it a laugher. Despite some ugly penalties on defense, despite the fact that the Giants were maybe more able to move the ball on offense than we thought, the Ravens ultimately did what they had to do. They took down the inferior opponent, and they look good doing it.
Yeah, first of all, we got to get in touch with our friends in Merriam-Webster and challenge them on that primary definition. I don't think I've ever heard someone referred to as a laugher, like
a big laugher. It's like the clapper,
so, but it's like
Jason Garrett's the clapper.
Yeah, but it's like calling someone a breather. Like, of course you breathe, of course you laugh. Like, isn't the more colloquial usage what we're talking about right now? Like, that game was a laugher,
Probably.
that quarter was a laugher.
Probably. Let's call them up.
Okay, I think they might be dead, but yeah. I don't know. Do we want to start with the good stuff or the bad stuff first? We can do Lamar, or we can do penalties.
Well, come on, we got to start with the good stuff. This was too big a win coming off the bye. Look, this team has had a tendency the last couple of years to play down to the competition. I mean, you think of the Colts game last year, you think of the Raiders game this year, you think of the Browns game this year. There was everything going for the Ravens. That's why they were 16.5-point favorites in this game. They're coming off the bye. They're healthy. They're fresh. There was simply every reason for them to come out and dominate, and they did. And they did it in impressive fashion. So to me, no, we may not have learned a whole lot about this team's ability to win against good teams like the Steelers, who obviously loom large on the schedule. We didn't learn any more about this team's ability to win in the playoffs, but it was just good to see that they took care of the games, the opponent that they needed to take care of in this one. And they just, from start to finish, if it weren't for a handful of penalties, which we'll discuss, more than a handful, I should say, they would have utterly, Lamar Jackson wouldn't have played after halftime, basically, in this game. He ends up getting pulled midway through the fourth quarter, but the Ravens did everything that they wanted to do in this game. 5 passing touchdowns for Lamar Jackson. Rashad Bateman caught 2 of those. They look great in this game, as they should have.
Yeah, and I think that the big thing is that very little negative will carry over into that next game. As far as I could tell, there were no injuries. Kyle Hamilton missed a couple plays, but he was back in there. Travis Jones was limping a little bit in the second quarter, but he was sprinting back out onto the field to start the third. No guys leaving for concussions, which can't be said for Tommy DeVito. It seemed like everyone was in a pretty good mood. But it is just a different football universe that the Ravens are going to be stepping into when they, get off their train in Baltimore, because going from this injury depleted, talent starved Giants team to a Steelers team that at last check was losing to the Eagles, and will be fighting for potentially the an AFC North title. They would be fighting for an AFC North title on Saturday. It's just complete ends of the two different ends of the spectrum in terms of what is kind of at hand for the Ravens right here, because you have a kind of a AAA outfit here with the Giants, and then you have a team that in Pittsburgh, a few teams have been playing better than them, at least before this Philadelphia game. So, it was interesting to hear John Harbaugh say that they've already kind of turned the corner. They've already put that page to Steelers week. Obviously, you can kind of get away with that with this being a 6-day week instead of a 7-day week. Roquan said he wouldn't be watching film of the Steelers tonight. He was going to enjoy that, peace and quiet. But as soon as Monday hits, all focus is on Pittsburgh. And why bother spending any time focusing on this game, because it pretty much went to script, just like you said.
But can we talk a little bit about this game, Jonas? That's why we're live after the game. I know why spend any time focusing on this, but we have to talk about the good. If we're on this podcast lambasting the team after losses, we have to be able to represent when they take care of business, and do so, with 5 passing touchdowns from Lamar Jackson, 290 passing yards. Also had 6 carries for 65 rushing yards. Listened to his mom, who said he should have run the ball more against the Eagles. Did have that one fumble that marred his day. I mean, the Ravens started out slow. They started out with that fumble and then a punt on their first 2 possessions, and then they score touchdowns on their next 5 possessions. This is an absolutely horrible Giants team. It's a terrible Giants defense. Really, the one playmaker that they had on their defense was Brian Burns, and I think he left midway through the game. So they offensive line just washed them down. Derrick Henry was beating him on the ground. Lamar Jackson was taking the yardage that was in front of him. And it was also great to see Rashad Bateman grab a couple beautiful touchdown passes from Lamar.
Isn't it the most Rashad Bateman thing ever to get like 2 big touchdowns and only finish with 3 catches?
Yeah.
just one of these days, I want a Jamar Chase level of volume for Rashad Bateman. I know that he's not really the designated, quick game guy, and this team has so many, good to great weapons for Lamar that you don't really have to force feed Rashad like you would have to force feed Malik Neighbors, say, or Jamar Chase when T. Higgins is out. But I would be curious, just as a scientific experiment, for Rashad Bateman to get more than like 6 or 7 targets in a game. And I think today he only got 5, right?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, Zay Flowers also led the team in catches. He had 6 catches. Mark Andrews, by the way, we do need to give a shout out to, who broke the Ravens record for most touchdowns with 48. Another nice grab in the first half of this game for the touchdown. That was the Ravens' first score of the game. Devontae Walker. How about Devontae Walker catching a touchdown in this game? Deontay Johnson, that could have been you. I mean, Devontae Walker came into this game with 6 offensive snaps. He'd been inactive for 8 games, and Lamar Jackson still threw to him in the end zone. A nice little Tez toe tap in the late stages of this one, and nice to see that the 4th-round rookie got a little bit of love.
Yeah, what do you think Deontay Johnson was? Well, first of all, do you think Deontay Johnson was watching this game? And second of all, what do you think Deontay Johnson was thinking as he was watching this game? Because I should note, Mike Garafolo of the NFL Network reported pregame that the Ravens expect Deontay Johnson to return to the facility tomorrow. So it was, or I guess it will indeed be, just the week-long suspension. It doesn't sound like it's going to be a suspension that turns into a release unless things really go out of hand. But I know it wasn't, a high volume game for the 2nd and 3rd tier guys on this team, but you saw Tylan Wallace with a nice catch, on a kind of Lamar Jackson fastball. You had Nelson Aguilar with a, full extension grab. You had, Tez Walker obviously with the touchdown. I still think that Deontay Johnson, in a vacuum, is probably better than everyone but Zay and Rashad. But I don't know what kind of depth. I don't know if the depth chart that he's walking into, excuse me, is any more accommodating to touches and to snaps than it was when he left this team.
Yeah, I mean, everybody else on this team is doing stuff, and since he's come to the Ravens, he hasn't done anything. I mean, I imagine that that's going to be the most we see of Devontae Walker the rest of the season, unless the Ravens are playing in a Week 18 game that doesn't matter, in which case they'd probably be, have their seed locked up, and they wouldn't be playing for the division at that point. They'd probably be losing to the Steelers, but barring a basically meaningless game, I think that's the most we'll see of Devontae Walker. It's nice that he got that touchdown pass. But yeah, I mean, Deontay Johnson is still the third most talented wide receiver on this team, I think you could say. But because you've said a million times, because he's not as good a blocker as Nelson Aguilar or Isaiah Likely, and because, he doesn't do any one thing better than Zay Flowers or Rashad Bateman, it's just hard to find a role for him on this team. But that being said, I mean, this was one of those games where we wanted to see a lot of the backups, a lot of the guys who aren't usually shining in games get an opportunity to do so. We saw a lot of the backup offensive linemen in the fourth quarter. We saw obviously Josh Johnson get some run at the end of this game. This could have been an opportunity for Deontay Johnson to just rack up some stats, to get that touchdown at the end of the game, and to make his stats look a whole lot better when he hits free agency after the season. And that's a missed opportunity on his part, because it's his fault that was on at home watching or maybe not watching this game.
I don't think we'll get the opportunity to ask him what he was doing in the locker room this week, but maybe we will.
Yeah. What did you think? Did you have any time, by the way, to watch at the end of the game in the fourth quarter any of the backups? We saw Ben Cleveland out there. We saw Andrew Voorhees out there on the offensive line. Or were you just kind of buried in your laptop writing, or did you actually get to evaluate any of these guys?
I thought Rasheen Ali looked like he had some juice. I think that was notable. I was kind of holding my breath every time he maybe got a little bit loose with the ball security, because that was, of course, the issue for him at Marshall. Just he put the ball on the ground way too often. But it's as you see when like high school guys go to college and then college guys go to the NFL, there is that adjustment period when they realize the speed that I have, that I used to be able to turn the corner with and pull away from guys, is no longer there, or it's no longer as pronounced. But I think you saw some of that acceleration that makes him, a pretty exciting open field prospect. Like he was able to accelerate from guys who maybe had a running start from him, or to kind of keep it even with guys who were bearing down on him. Obviously, I still think, a pretty distant third behind, excuse me, Derrick Henry and Justice Hill on that depth chart. But I liked what I saw. Obviously, he's done some good things on special teams, which is probably, to the detriment of Keaton Mitchell's playing time, who, of course, was inactive today. I saw Andrew Voorhees get to the second level pretty easily on a run, I think, to the weak side, away from him. I think Ben Cleveland lost on one of his run blocks, but, it's hard to tell if he was the one at fault for that. And then I didn't really pay too much attention to Josh Jones, because obviously he is not really the guy that a lot of fans are clamoring for. It was a little bit disappointing that Ben Cleveland, when he did get in, was at center and not right guard. But that kind of is, I guess,
Maybe he's a center.
Legacy of that. I think that's kind of a bit of a legacy from training camp, where and even the preseason, where the position that the Ravens played him the most because of that injury to Tyler Linderbaum was center. So, I guess with Nick Samac being inactive and Daniel and Tyler Linderbaum having gone through some minor physical ups and downs this year with the back injury, I think it makes sense to protect a guy as valuable as that, especially with a game as physical as this one against Pittsburgh coming up. Protect him, put Ben Cleveland in. But just from a selfish perspective, as from someone who would be curious to see how this guy would be able to hang in there against a very overmatched Giants defensive line, it was disappointing that we didn't get to see him there.
Sure. All right. Should we talk about the defense here?
Yep.
Let's talk about the penalties, because that's where we have to start once again. The only time it felt like that the Giants were able to move the ball consistently was because the Ravens were shooting themselves in the foot defensively. They commit, as a team, 12 penalties for 112 yards. Giants got 8 first downs from penalties, and they only had 19 total first downs on the day. So the Ravens almost gave them half of their first downs through penalties. This is an area of the game that has killed them all season, and it didn't matter today. They're facing like you said, a AAA team. But the fact that they weren't able to play a little bit cleaner brand of football coming out of the bye and against a much worse team was perhaps a little bit disheartening, because it's something that could kill them in a playoff game.
Yeah, I've got a a humdinger of a stat for you, Paul. And obviously, we talk about EPA and penalties and just how damaging they've been, and just how we now have some quantitative tools to measure it. So just poking around on True Media, this goes back to 2010, and I'm sorting by game. So just imagine the, I guess, thousands of games that have been played over the past 15 seasons. The Ravens today lost 12.25 points to defensive penalties. That is the most any team has allowed in that span.
Jeez.
There are only 4 teams total whose defense cost them over 10 points in penalties. And it makes sense, because not only did we see like a high volume of penalties today, but they were in high leverage spots. They were on third down, or they were on fourth down. I mean, just to bring it up and see, where the Ravens kind of cost themselves. There was the pass interference to Malik Neighbors on fourth down in the third quarter. Brandon Stevens, that cost the Ravens 3.5 EPA. There's the penalty on Nate Wiggins in the fourth quarter, where he's looking for Darius Slade. That's 2.6 EPA. The pass incomplete to Daniel Bellinger that ends up with a roughing the passer penalty on Nnamdi Madubuike. That's almost 2 points in EPA. So there are 7 plays where the Ravens basically cost themselves a point in EPA. And you put all that together and you do it quarter after quarter, drive after drive, you put yourself in a situation where, despite holding this, clearly disadvantaged Giants team to under 250 yards of total offense, you end up with 2 touchdowns scored against you. And frankly, it should have been more, just considering the stops that the Ravens were able to get in some of those high leverage spots. So you would have thought and hoped that this Ravens team, coming out of the bye, having had the opportunity to reset mentally, physically, have extra time for some instruction on how to play the ball, on how to avoid driving the quarterback into the ground, on how to avoid, trying to out leverage a left tackle by not hitting him in the face. I know a lot of that is just, random bad luck and just kind of the variance that you get from the game to game. But against a team that is this untalented, you should not have to resort to penalties as much as the Ravens did.
Yeah, I mean, this team still leads the NFL in penalties. They're one over the Tennessee Titans, I think, coming into today. So, it can be random bad luck, but when they do it consistently week in and week out, at some point, it's a trend. It's a sign that, there are bigger things at play here. It's frustrating, especially because Brandon Stevens was actually playing seemed like he was getting his hands on the ball, which so many times this season, if it's just felt like he's playing great coverage, he just has no awareness of where the ball is or no ability to get his hand up and stop a completed pass. He was certainly getting his hands on the ball, but he was also getting his hands on opposing wide receivers. So he's either allowing completions or committing pass interferences. And to come out of the bye, the Ravens made another seemingly change personnel wise on defense. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but Brandon Stevens still out there. We're still seeing him being thrown up against maybe not the number one wide receiver, because we saw a lot of Nate Wiggins against Malik Neighbors today, but he's playing right cornerback and he's starting out there with Marlon Humphrey in the slot, and he's still not doing his job. I mean, unfortunately he's barreling towards free agency, having just an absolutely abysmal season.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the bigger question that I have for this team, for this defense, as it hurdles toward the postseason, and it's one that if we asked the Ravens, we probably wouldn't get a straight answer on, but like, could they potentially be a defense that come playoff time has the curveball of being willing to let cornerbacks travel with wide receivers? Because as we know, if you are looking at it from the quarterback's perspective and you're, have the Ravens nickel personnel or dime personnel on the field, it's going to be Brandon Stevens on the left side. It's going to be Nate Wiggins on the right side. It's going to be Marlon Humphrey in the slot. Kyle Hamilton and Ardarius Washington in the back end.
Right.
And if you know how the defense is going to line up, then that means that you can put your best wide receiver against whichever cornerback you feel most comfortable with. Maybe it's Nate Wiggins because you've got a powerhouse after the catch like AJ Brown. Maybe it's a kind of contested catch winner like not Devontae Adams, but because he's not going to be in the playoffs, but someone like that. And you want him against Brandon Stevens. Obviously, Marlon Humphrey has done a great job, although he himself had a holding penalty today. And it just would be, I think, something that would infuriate Ravens fans. I think already has infuriated Ravens fans that they don't have this kind of flexibility to respond to, teams going after them in certain ways. And
Right.
obviously that kind of ignores the fact that maybe they're playing this way for a certain reason and that the communication is easier when you have guys who have been in their spots and played those reps 1,000 times as opposed to being on the other side and having no experience, and maybe footwork has a lot to do with it. But I don't know. Maybe the saving grace for the Ravens come playoff time is that there aren't a huge amount of like dynamic number one wide receivers in the AFC who could get in their way. I mean, like Nico Collins could be one for Houston, but he's maybe not all the way back to what he was early in the season. George Pickens is certainly a guy who fits that mold, but is he going to be completely healthy with this hamstring injury and everything? And then can you trust Russell Wilson, especially in the cold weather? The Chiefs don't really have anyone. That there's just not a lot of like alpha guys, and maybe that'll make the Ravens cornerback situation kind of moot. But it would be interesting to see if that is something that is in consideration for the Ravens as they make this pivot to the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean they're obviously not averse to making changes late in the season, personnel wise and
Yep.
schematically. But that would certainly be a change of pace to throw out there in the playoffs, and maybe a little bit too much at once. That may be too much to throw on rookie cornerback Nate Wiggins to suddenly shadow wide receivers instead of playing left cornerback or right cornerback. And honestly, Nate Wiggins, I mean, we talk about Brandon Stevens struggling. Nate Wiggins continues to play great. I thought he played great in this game. I thought he was very good in coverage. We mentioned the one penalty, but other than that, I mean, I thought he played pretty clean, pretty good coverage on Malik Neighbors. We liked this matchup coming in, 2 first-round rookies going at it. And I thought, this is the kind of body type, this is the kind of receiver that Nate Wiggins can handle. It's the lighter, shiftier wide receiver who can create a lot of separation. Nate Wiggins is great at not allowing separation. It's maybe the bigger, stronger guys like AJ Brown that he struggles with. I mean, I think that it's pretty clear that going into the offseason, they're going to feel good about having Nate Wiggins at outside corner, but the way Brandon Stevens has played, they're probably going to have to replace him. And we may be talking about the Ravens going with another first-round cornerback because they're going to have Marlon Humphrey set to make a lot of money next year in the slot. He's having a good season. And Nate Wiggins, you feel good about going into year 2. Then you have a question mark on the other side.
Yeah, and maybe it's Jalen Armour-Davis who would be in year 4, and I think has gotten better every year.
But why
Even though
haven't we seen more of him? That's my question.
I know.
Like we've seen so many changes on the defensive side. Like we saw Eddie Jackson start and then get cut. Like we've seen Ardarius Washington start at safety. We saw, as we'll talk about the changes at linebacker, but I'm almost disappointed I haven't seen Jalen Armour-Davis, who's supposed to have all the tools and is entering, what is this, his 3rd year? Like, why hasn't he gotten more of a shot if Brandon Stevens has struggled as badly as he has?
Yeah, and I guess the big X factor for the offseason at that cornerback spot is TJ Tampa. I mean, we know that before the draft, some people saw him as a potential late 1 guy. He fell to the 4th round. I think what we've seen from guys drafted this year who don't have the elite speed, which is obviously the knock on TJ Tampa, is that if you're in the right system and you've got the know-how and you've got the right infrastructure around you, that speed doesn't necessarily need to be disqualifying. And we just haven't seen a lot of TJ this year because of injuries and everything else. And obviously he wasn't activated for today's game, so maybe they ramp him up coming this late into the season. But I feel it's pretty unlikely that, considering just how few reps he's gotten this year, that he figures into that secondary mix in any kind of prominent way.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about linebacker, because this was a change. We saw Trenton Simpson snap count dip seriously at times this year, especially in the second half, and it reached I think, an all-time low today. I mean, I think he played, 4 or 5 defensive snaps in this game, and pretty sure all of them came in garbage time. The Ravens went into this season saying their third round, second year player is going to be the guy to take over for Patrick Queen. They talked him up. Roquan talked him up. They talked about how exciting it was going to be to have him get everyday starts and to play just about every down. And it just hasn't gone that well. And now the Ravens, coming out of the bye, decided now's time to make the change. It's not a great sign for this experiment. Not to say that, look, we saw Patrick Queen himself went through ups and downs in his first couple of years in the NFL. It wasn't until Mike McDonald showed up that we saw Patrick Queen turn it on. But it's clear that the Trenton Simpson experiment has not gone quite as well as planned. And this team is just patching it together now at linebacker the rest of the way.
Yeah, and I don't know if he would have played at all if the Ravens hadn't been in blowout mode and getting those guys snaps late. I mean, it was Roquan in the middle, obviously, with kind of rotating cast of Malik Harrison and Chris Board, depending on personnel, depending on game scripts, all that kind of stuff. So, you mentioned, Paul, that probably like October thereabouts, like we saw the Ravens start getting away from the dime looks that they'd embraced and had gotten into because there was that uncertainty about, can you have Trenton Simpson be the every down guy next to Rowe that PQ was last year? It seemed like, they had, things had started to slow down a little bit for him. I don't know that he had a terrible game against the Eagles, but there were a couple plays where you kind of wonder, like, was he in the right spot? Like there was a run for, I think, Saquon or Jalen Hurts or just some type of option play. And Trent Simpson goes, like, kind of bounces over to a gap that no one is covering. And it's tough for me, a layman, to decipher whether that was just him being completely bamboozled or maybe it was like a technique thing where it was a scrape exchange where he's kind of accounting for somebody in the read option breakdown of all that. But the biggest hurdle for him, I think, has not been going downhill. It's been having the kind of sense of place and time and just understanding where he needs to be in his coverage drops. And I think that's what is giving the Ravens the confidence in Chris Board. Is he knows where to be, he knows what to do. And Malik Harrison is just like an early down hammer. I mean, I think I'm still so impressed from what he did against the Chargers. He wasn't perfect in that game by any stretch, but I think he graded out as the Ravens' top defender in that game on PFF. Had a bunch of tackles, and you can line him up as an edge setter, and I think they'll probably need to do that against the Steelers, considering just how heavy they'd like to get with things with 12 personnel, 13 personnel. But yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting week. It's a storyline rich week for Trenton because I don't think he did a whole lot against the Steelers in that first game, and PQ is picking up and getting some Pro Bowl buzz in certain corners of the internet. And the guy that a lot of Ravens fans were so sure would be able to replace him, if not be better than him, is frankly not doing a whole lot. I mean, he's helping on special teams. He's a great athlete, can make a bunch of contributions that way. But it just goes to show how steep this learning curve can be for rookie and second year linebackers.
Right. And progress isn't linear. I mean, he was starting to play better as the season was going along. And you think he kind of he hit his career high in snaps in the win over the Bengals, 74 snaps. And then the next week is the loss of Pittsburgh, and he plays his worst game of the season in the game where, as you mentioned, PQ shines and gets revenge against his old team. And that's when the Ravens decided they weren't really ready to commit to him for 75%, 80%, close to 100% of defensive snaps. Because after that was the next game, the Chargers game, where Roquan Smith is out, and you see just a combination of Chris Board and Malik Harrison. You just don't see Trenton Simpson on the field as much. And then 22 against the Eagles, and now 5 snaps against 4 snaps. Sorry, PFF has him down for 5, so we may have missed a snap at some point. But 5 snaps, 4 snaps, whatever it is, against the Giants. So
yeah,
this team's
the only 3 games of the season where he's played less than 50% of the defensive snaps have been the Ravens' past 3.
It's just crazy to think. Going back to before the season, if you were to say, or Darius Washington would be a starter at safety, and Trenton Simpson would play 5 snaps in week 15, and you'd see Chris Board play most of the snaps at inside linebacker next to Roquan Smith. It just goes to show how much our expectations for this defensive change. But look, whatever works. I mean, it worked today against the Giants for the most part, beside all the penalties. And I still think that this defensive configuration is their best bet going forward. I think that they've had more success with what they have right now than they did in the first half of the season. So maybe give credit to Zach Orr for adjusting, because they have been able to make adjustments. But obviously, Jonas, it's going to come down to next week. It's going to come down to their rematch against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That is the more important game, by far the most important game. Currently, as we stand, with the Steelers are trailing the Eagles 17-10 right now. The Ravens are a game and a half back in the division. They need to win this game on Saturday in Baltimore, and it's going to be a good one. We're going to see hopefully a better game from Justin Tucker than we saw the last time these two teams met. Tucker made all 5 of his extra points today. How about that? How about the fact it wasn't tested on any field goal attempts, but seemed like after a very difficult, very excruciating, the words that he used bye week, he was able to get through it. And this team is sticking by him, and he's going to be tested next week, most likely.
Yeah, this game was such a laugher that even Jordan Stout got on the kickoff duty late, which was, I think, the first time he's done that. I know, like, obviously Ronnie Stanley doesn't speak for everyone, but I think one thing that we've learned from Hard Knocks, specifically the Ravens section, is that John Harbaugh is very upfront with his guys about what the stakes of certain games are and like where the Ravens are in relation to other teams in their division or the conference. And so I asked Ronnie Stanley post game, like, if the Ravens know, or if he knows that unless the Ravens win on Saturday against Pittsburgh, their AFC North title chances are kaput. And he said, I don't think anyone's thinking about that. I think we're thinking about, we just got to win this game no matter what. We're looking at like a playoff game, winner go home. And then he said, he talked a little bit about how the Ravens don't really engage with hypotheticals like that. But I mean, the stakes are what they are. Because of the tiebreaker of, head-to-head tiebreakers, and just the fact that we are down to the final 3 games of the season. If the Ravens lose on Saturday, they can't get higher than the 5th seed in the AFC. It's as simple as that. I imagine that they will be favored just like they were in Pittsburgh. Obviously, the big injury question mark for all this is Pickens. Also notable that the Steelers could be without former Ravens safety Deshaun Elliott, who I don't think practiced at all last week because of a hammy, and is obviously not playing against Philly right now. But the Ravens need to kind of get past this. I mean, we were talking to Broderick Washington post game, and he was talking about how there's an understanding among guys in his kind of cohort that have been in Baltimore for more than a few years now. He's only beaten them once as a Raven, that they need to get this ship turned around. And what a week to do it. With Pittsburgh potentially coming in here after a loss to Philly. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen over these next hour and a half or so of game time, but the Ravens could really put themselves in good position. I think they'd probably become the favorite to win that AFC North because of their schedule compared to what the Steelers have on theirs, if they come out of there with a win on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it's all going to come down to that. Our view of the team, we've said from the start, we're not going to learn, we're not going to know what the narrative is of this season until we get to the playoffs. The season is going to be defined by that, but it starts with winning the division. It starts with giving yourself home field advantage in the playoffs. And once you do that, it makes it a whole lot easier to win in the playoffs. But if they can't beat Pittsburgh again this season, a team that I think by all accounts, they should beat at least once a year. In the last few years, it has not gone that way. Then I think we'll start to hear some people ring some more alarm bells in Baltimore, and then we'll settle in for what should be an interesting playoff road where they're going to be on the road. All right, Jonas, we should let's get the energy up. Let's get the excitement up. The Ravens still came out with a 35-14 win here. This was still a dominant performance. I don't care about the opponent. All right, they took care of business. Let's see some smiles.
Did we learn anything, Paul? We
learned
the value of friendship.
we learned that the Giants, like you said, and kudos to you on using another baseball reference, are a AAA franchise. I mean, this is a team that is just awful. I mean, just a terrible team. If Josh Johnson did not come into this game at some point, I would have been disappointed. The Giants are just that bad. They really, I have a really hard time seeing them win a game the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that Giants Twitter was going wild with, I think Shadur Sanders and like Travis Hunter throwing the ball around New York. You know, they were in town for the Heisman ceremony over the weekend, so their future is not going to be decided by Tommy DeVito or Tim Boyle or Drew Lock. I mean, it's still wild. we had Tim Boyle throwing touchdowns to Malik Neighbors. Just not something you could have gotten on any Vegas sportsbook anywhere. But yeah, I mean, there were things I thought the Ravens could have done better. I thought their pass rush was a little bit blah at times, considering the state of this offensive line. But you know, I think they've probably got some things up their sleeve that they're holding for Pittsburgh. You know,
yeah,
it's not like the season comes down to that game Saturday against the Steelers, but it kind of does, right?
Yeah, I mean the regular season does at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, also just like I think it's just good for the fan base at least to collectively get a nice easy win to not have their Sunday either ruined by a loss or have them reaching for the Pepto because they are freaking out about another close game. I mean, this is the first like blowout win since week 9 against Denver, and a lot has happened since then. So. I think it's just it left Ravens fans with a nice, just relaxing feeling because they did what they had to do. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. And if you write us a good review, a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, I will read it out here on the Banner Ravens podcast. That is a promise from me to you. And you got to subscribe to the Baltimore Banner if you don't already. $1 for 6 months to read all of Jonas's great work, Gianna Hahn, Kyle Goon as well. They will have you completely covered, and Jonas will be not on the Amtrak. Did you take the Amtrak, or did you drive up to New Jersey, Jonas?
I was in your hometown yesterday. I drove up to Philly, and then I drove up to Jersey today or last night.
I'm so sorry you had to be there. I loved during the broadcast when they were showing shots of Lower Manhattan, and I think Andrew Catalan was on the broadcast and saying just across the river. I think East Rutherford's a little bit farther than just across the river from Lower Manhattan. I don't think you're gonna make the trip up to Manhattan, are you, Jonas? You're just gonna head right by.
It's like when they would show B-roll from Maryland sports games, and instead of showing footage of the lovable, livable College Park, they would show photos of like the Washington Monument, which is not exactly College Park proper.
Exactly. If you can't see one from the other, then I don't think it's exactly close enough.
If you go to the top of Maryland's football stadium on a clear day, you can see the top of the Washington Monument. That's right. What I've been told.
I'll tell you, from Nats Park, you used to be able to see the Washington Monument. Can't do it anymore. Too many apartment buildings that they've thrown up there. But it used to be a nice thing that you could see. Not the case anymore. All right, Jonas, let's get out of here. Thanks so much for tuning into the Banner Ravens podcast. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano. We will be back this week, looking at Thursday again for another preview episode for the game of the year, Ravens and Steelers. We will have you covered there. Get the energy fired up.
Game of the year, part 5.
Part 5. Drink some Celsius, drink some coffee, because we are pumped for the final 3 games of the regular season. We'll catch you next time.